Hello viewer, welcome to Worldview. Today we take you from the tense corridors of diplomacy in Europe to the skies over Hong Kong. In Kiev, President Zelensky says Ukraine is ready to advance a US-backed peace plan, but point of dispute remains and talks with US President are on the agenda. Meanwhile, in Moscow, President Vladimir Putin has called for authorities to strengthen Russia's identity in territories of Ukraine under Russian control, signaling the deepening stakes in the region. And across the globe, tragedy struck in Hong Kong, where a massive fire tore through high-rise residential towers, leaving 4 dead and sending thick smoke across the city. From diplomacy to disaster, our team brings you the stories shaping the world today. Many thanks for staying tuned. This is Worldview on Spectrum TV. We begin Worldview today from the Russia and Ukraine war scene where President Vladimir Zelensky stepped forward with a message that echoed far beyond Kiev. He said he was ready to push ahead with a US-supported framework aimed at ending the war with Russia, but only through open, honest, and sincere conversation. And for that, he insisted a face-to-face conversation with US President Donald Trump was essential, with Europe seated at the table as well. Behind the scenes, American and Ukrainian officials have been working intensely, trying to close the gaps in Trump's proposed peace plan. For Ukraine, the stakes are enormous. Kiev remains wary of any agreements that could pressure them into accepting terms tilted heavily in Russia's favor, especially if those terms include giving up territories. Addressing what has become known as the coalition of the willing, Zelensky delivered a speech that carried both urgency and resolve. In the meantime, abroad Air Force One on Tuesday, President Donald Trump eased away from his own Thursday deadline for Ukraine to accept a US-backed peace proposal, signaling a slower and more flexible approach to negotiations. Speaking to reporters as he headed to Florida for the Thanksgiving holiday, Trump dismissed a report claiming U.S. negotiator Steve Witkoff had coached Russian officials on how to approach him during the talks. The president waved off the allegation, insisting it had on bearing on diplomatic efforts underway. Trump said U.S. negotiators were making headway with both Kiev and Moscow, adding that Russia had already agreed to certain concessions, though he declined to specify what they were. He also announced that Witkoff is expected to travel to Moscow next week for a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The president's comment suggests Washington is recalibrating its diplomatic timeline, allowing negotiations to stretch beyond early expectations as it works to shape a possible path towards ending the war. Meanwhile, on a quiet Tuesday, the Kremlin released a document that revealed just how far Russia intends to go in reshaping the identity of the territories it seized from Ukraine. Signed by President Vladimir Putin, the plan, titled Strategy of Russia's National Policy in the Period to 2036, laid out an ambitious vision. By 2036, 95% of the population across Russia, including the newly incorporated Ukrainian regions, should identify as Russia and speak the Russian language. The decree is the latest step in Moscow's long effort to tighten its grip on the areas taken since the 2022 invasion. For centuries, Russia and Ukraine have shared deep cultural links, and many Ukrainians once moved easily between both languages. But the war changed everything. Sympathy for Moscow has all but vanished, and the use of Russia in Ukraine has sharply declined. As both capitals sent their signal, one preparing to remodel identities, the other navigating diplomacy with caution, the distance between the two nations seemed to widen even further. So on the Ukraine and Russia war scene, French President Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday signaled caution over U.S. effort to broker peace in Ukraine, saying that while the initiative is a step towards ending the war, it still requires adjustment to be acceptable for Kiev and Europe. Speaking with newsmen, Macron addressed a 28-point U.S. peace proposal unveiled last week, which had caught officials in Washington, Kiev, and across Europe by surprise. The plan raised fresh concerns that the Trump administration might pressure Ukraine into accepting terms heavily favorable to Moscow. He emphasized that any territorial concession must ultimately be decided by Ukraine itself. Meanwhile, EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen vowed today that Europe would keep supporting Ukraine and pressuring Russia until a just and lasting peace, calling a revised US plan a starting point to end the war. For clearer understanding to our viewers, let's talk about what the peace plan is all about. First, we'll look at the core structure and goals of the plan. The plan itself presents itself as a comprehensive framework to end the war and create a lasting peace. It calls for an immediate ceasefire once both sides accept the agreement. It proposes a broad non-aggression agreement between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe, aiming to settle all ambiguity of the last 30 years. It also envisions future security dialogues between Russia and NATO, mediated by the United States, to address broader regional and global security concerns. So, at first value, the plan attempts to combine a ceasefire, security guarantees, diplomatic normalization, and post-war reconstruction under a single framework. Let's talk about territorial and sovereignty provisions. This is arguably the most controversial and consequential part of the plan. The plan would have the US and effectively the international community under the Accord recognized as de facto Russian territory certain regions, Crimea, and the bulk of the region collectively known as Donbas, including Luhansk Oblast and Donetsk Oblast. More controversially, the proposal asks Ukraine to withdraw even from parts of Donetsk that it still controls. Those areas would then be classified as a demilitarized buffer zone, neutral under Russian sovereignty, at least de facto, and internationally recognized as belonging to Russia, though Russian troops would be barred from entering the buffer zone. For two other contested regions, Kherson Oblast and Zaporizhzhia Oblast, the plan proposes freezing the current front lines. That means Russia would largely retain control over the territory it currently occupies, locking it into games. The plan claims to confirm Ukraine's sovereignty, but in practice, these territorial terms undermine what many consider the core of that sovereignty. For many Ukrainian leaders and supporters, this provision amounts to a major concession. Surrendering long-fought territories, including areas that remain under Kiev's control, or frozen lines that they de facto legitimize forcefully take over. What will we say about security, military, and defense condition? Under the plan, Ukraine's military and security posture would be substantially altered. The size of Ukrainian armed forces could be capped at 600,000 personnel. That's a reduction from current estimate of about 880,000. Ukraine will be required to constitutionally renounce joining NATO. The plan also demands that NATO adopt a formal ban on future admission of Ukraine. NATO forces would be barred from being stationed in Ukraine under this agreement. In exchange, the plan promises security guarantees from the US if Russia were to invade Ukraine again, including the possibility of decisive coordinated military response and reinstatement of sanctions on Russia. So while Ukraine gets a formal security promise, in return, it gives up its right to seek NATO protection, significantly reduces its military, and concede on strategic border region. Let's look at the economic reconstruction and diplomatic provisions. The plan doesn't only handle military or territorial issues. It also has a broad economic and reconstruction component. Part of it envisions using frozen Russian assets, reportedly $100 million plus additional funds from Europe and Western partners to rebuild Ukraine, reconstruction of cities, infrastructure, energy and gas systems, and also a broader economic revitalization. The framework suggests a long-term economic partnership involving the US, Ukraine, and possibly Russia. Once sanctions are lifted, including cooperation in energy, infrastructure, natural resources extraction, and other industries. On the diplomatic front, the plan calls for a non-aggression pact, security dialogues, and a global package to resolve regional tensions, potentially offering a path for Russia to reintegrate into international economic forums. These provisions seem designed to offer Ukraine benefit and a fresh start, but only under terms that many believe compromises its sovereignty and strategic future. And now, the legal, humanitarian, and transitional clauses. To fully seal the deal, the proposal includes several transitional and humanitarian measures. The plan calls for election in Ukraine within 100 days of agreement, likely to re-legitimize political authority under the new territorial and security realities. All participants in the conflict, both Ukraine and Russia, would receive full amnesty for wartime action under the agreement. That includes soldiers or officials who committed wartime crimes. Now, this is according to critics. The plan also envisioned a peace council, reportedly chaired by Donald Trump, to monitor compliance, oversee implementation, and impose sanction or revert benefit if parties violate the terms. Humanitarian aspects include prison and hostage exchanges, civilian returns including children, family reunifications, and border reconciliation and reconstruction programs. In theory, the plan offers a full transition ceasefire, reconstruction, legal closure, and institutional mechanism to prevent renewed war. To offer a comprehensive settlement, many experts, Ukrainian officials, and European allies see serious problems. The first is territorial concession. Recognizing parts of Ukraine as permanently Russia, especially regions still partly under Ukrainian control, undermines Ukraine's sovereignty and is considered by many as rewarding aggression. 2. Security risks. Limiting Ukraine's military, banning NATO membership and foreign troops while giving only a vague guarantees could leave Ukraine vulnerable if Russia violates the agreement. 3. Legal and moral issues. The blanket amnesty for wartime action would likely protect people accused of war crimes or crimes against humanity, denying victim justice and accountability. We also have power imbalance. The reconstruction fund financed by frozen Russian assets and the proposed economic cooperation would strengthen Russia's long term, while Ukraine would effectively be rebuilding under conditions defined by its attacker. We can also see lack of clarity. Now, key parts like what the security guarantees actually mean, how enforcement will work, what economic partnership with Russia would look like, and also the security issues still remains vague or undefined. That uncertainty makes the deal risky for Ukraine. Now, because of all these issues, many regard the plan as ineffective, tilting heavily in favor of Russia's interests, or at least undermining Ukraine's sovereignty and security in exchange for uncertain economic benefits. Meanwhile, since the original draft was leaked, there has already been pushback from Ukraine and European allies, leading to negotiations and proposed revisions. Now, according to recent reporting, the original 28-point proposal has been pared down to 19-point version, fueling talks among US, Ukrainians, and European officials. The revised version reportedly softens or removes some of the most controversial demands, for example, limiting the size of Ukraine's army or granting full amnesty, but many core territorial, sovereignty, and security limiting aspects remains under contention. Ukraine says it will only accept a genuine and balanced peace, one that does not force capitalization, accept full territorial surrender, or compromise its right to choose alliance. On a side development, southern eastern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia came under a devastating drone assault by Russian forces, leaving fires in its wake and dozens injured. The regional governor Ivan Fedorov reported that 19 people were wounded and that buildings, shops and vehicles had sustained heavy damage. In a telegram post, Fedorov described the scale of destruction. 31 apartment blocks and 20 private homes have been damaged, while several commercial establishments were completely destroyed. 8 of the injured are receiving treatment in hospitals. Images circulating online showed firefighters struggling to control flames engulfing high-rise buildings and streets littered with gutted vehicles. Ukraine's Air Force said its forces had successfully intercepted much of the assault, shooting down 72 of 90 drones and 2 ballistic missiles launched by Russia during the nationwide overnight attack. We move now to the Asian Pacific region, where a massive fire tore through multiple high-rise towers in Hong Kong's northern Taipo district today, leaving at least 4 dead and trapping others inside, authorities said. As ducts fell, thick black smoke poured from the 31-story residential towers, which house around 2,000 apartments. Firefighters worked relentlessly to contain the blaze, navigating the towering inferno that threatened hundreds of families. The Fire Services Department told newsmen that officials would not yet know how many residents may still be trapped inside the building, as the rescue operation continues amid the flames and smoke. The scale of the fire and uncertainty over those still inside have raised urgent concerns, with emergency teams deploying all available resources in a race against time to save residents and bring the situation under control. In a related development, authorities in southern Thailand are preparing to deploy helicopters today to evacuate critically ill patients from a hospital cut off by some of the region's worst flooding in years. The disaster has already claimed 33 lives and more heavy rain is forecast. The floods have swept across 9 Thai provinces and 8 Malaysian states for a second consecutive year, forcing nearly 45,000 people to flee their homes in both countries. In Indonesia, officials estimate that between 8 and 13 people have died from floods and landslide this week, while Malaysia has reported at least 1 fatality. In Thailand's hardest hit city, Hatia, the main government hospital treating around 600 patients, including 50 in intensive care, was partially submerged when floodwaters inundated its first floor, public health officials said. Helicopters would deliver food and evacuate the most vulnerable patients. As emergency teams mobilized, the region braces for continuing rainfall and rising waters, highlighting the growing challenges of extreme weather events in Southeast Asia. Elsewhere, a massive fire swept through one of Dhaka's largest slums on Tuesday evening, leaving thousands homeless and reducing rows of tin-roofed shanties to smoldering ruins, officials said. The blast broke out shortly after sunset in Coral, a densely packed settlement at the heart of Bangladesh capital. Now, this is home to nearly 80,000 residents. Coral sits wedged between the upscale Gunsul and Banani neighborhoods, flanked by towering luxurious apartment complex. As orange flames shot into the night skies, thick smoke blanketed the area, forcing residents to flee with whatever belongings they could carry. The fire's sudden spread and intensity left a trail of destruction, underscoring the vulnerability of Dhaka's sprawling informal settlement to disaster. In China issued a stark warning today, pledging to crush any foreign attempt to interfere over Taiwan, following Japan's announcement that it plans to deploy missiles on an island near the democratically governed island. Peng Kyung-jung, spokesperson for China's Taiwan Affairs Office, during a regular press briefing, said, "We will crush all foreign interference." The warning underscores rising tension in East Asia as both regional powers and neighboring countries navigate the delicate balance of security, sovereignty, and strategic interests in the Taiwan Strait. Beijing considers Taiwan part of its territory and has not ruled out the use of force to assert control. Taiwan's government, however, rejects China's claim, insisting that only its people can decide the island's future. In the meantime, Taiwan unveiled a $40 billion supplementary defense budget. President La Ching-te announced today, signing the island's determination to strengthen its defense amid growing pressure from China. Over the past 5 years, Beijing has intensified military and political actions aimed at asserting its claim over democratically governed Taiwan, a claim Taiwan firmly rejects. In response to calls from Washington for Taiwan to increase its own defense spending, similar to U.S. demands on European allies, Lai said in August that he hoped to raise defense expenditure to 5% of the island's gross domestic product by 2030. The new budget reflects Taiwan's ongoing commitment to safeguarding its sovereignty and preparing for a potential escalation in cross-strait tensions. We move now to the Middle East region where, according to Palestinian officials, Israeli security forces launched a major counter-terrorism operation in the northern West Bank today, focusing on the city of Tubas. Tubas Governor Ahmed al-Assad told newsmen that Israeli troops, supported by a helicopter that had opened fire, were encircling the city and taking positions across multiple neighborhoods. Al-Assad added that residents forced to leave their homes were ordered not to return until the operation concludes, which he expected could take several days. The Israeli military confirmed that the operation, conducted alongside police and intelligence unit, began today. The unfolding incursion underscores the ongoing tensions and security challenges in the West Bank, with local residents caught in a crossfire of escalating military action. We'll take a quick break right now. When we return, we'll turn the spotlight now to Africa. But for now, do stay tuned to us for these and many more stories right after the breather.